Today, I want to talk about spiritual bypassing. The fact that spirituality is becoming more mainstream for me poses both a problem and a win. And the thing is that whenever anything becomes mainstream, we have to be a little bit careful as to what narrative is being pushed out there. Because now, when we think about spirituality and the New Age movement, we think about things like manifestation and toxic positivity, because these are not true spiritual teachings. These are spiritual teachings that have been distorted, and only half the story is really being taught. It really bothers me when people are consistently going around and saying love and light, because a tendency that these people can have is to put on blinders to ignore what's really happening in terms of the darkness, because these new age movement teachings have led people to believe that as long as we think positive enough, then everything bad is just going to magically go away. And that's just not the way the world works. We have to remember that we live in a world of duality. Everything in this world exists on a spectrum. So it's quite interesting because we had the 999 portal in September, but if you think about it, we had three 999 portals, because the 18th was also a 9 in numerology, and the 27th was also a 9. And so, for those of you who did rituals or who set intentions on the first 999, you will most likely have felt big energies taking place during these last few days of September. And I can say that there has been so much going on with me personally, where I was feeling extremely emotional. I was experiencing a lot of triggers, and I really couldn't quite understand what was triggering me, what was really bothering me. And something that I've come to learn through my own personal healing journey is that generally, when something is bothering us, there's actually something underneath that. The thing that we are being triggered about is normally not really the issue that I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's not really the issue that we're dealing with. It's generally hiding something that's underneath. And so I had to sit with myself a lot and try and understand what was going on with me. And sometimes it's not easy to sit with ourselves and to see the patterns, because this is why shadow work is so important. Because unless we're willing to go and look at the parts of ourselves that exist that are not the prettiest, then we're not really ever going to heal, because healing isn't about the positive, good aspects. It's about looking at all the messy, dark, uncomfortable parts of ourselves. And remember, the shadow aspects are in most circumstances, the shadow aspect is created as a protection mechanism. So let me explain it this way. When you, for example, are if you were, say, a child and you experienced some kind of traumatic or challenging situation, what we tend to do, and this also occurs in adulthood, but I like to talk a lot about childhood trauma, because most people in adulthood who are dealing with situate challenges and obstacles and things not working the way that they would like them to, generally is an indication of childhood trauma that wasn't fully dealt with. And what I've also found on my 10 years of healing journey, and this is also, I say that with a pinch of salt, because the healing journey is continuous. And as I said, everything exists on a spectrum. There are layers and layers and layers. So let's say you're working with overcoming fear of something. You might be someone who has no fear of, I don't know, climbing up a mountain and jumping off with a parachute, but you might have fear talking about your feelings to someone who's close to you. So fear, all these challenges and and situations that we're trying to heal from, that we're trying to better ourselves, that we're trying to overcome, well, they exist in many different ways. So I don't really know what I'm trying to say here, but I've had such a crazy few days and was really taken back to my childhood as I sat with myself and really tried to understand what was going on. And the thing is, what can be really frustrating about the healing journey is that, we can think that we've dealt with something and then something happens and we're like, oh, I thought I dealt with that thing, only to find that that issue is really still present. It's just present in a different way. As I said, there are layers. So let's say we're dealing with overcoming fear, for example. Well, we have to identify what exactly is it that gives us fear? Where are we fearful? And we have to work with that. And so what happens is once we start dealing with a certain issue that we have, a certain challenge that we have, let's say we now deal with that issue, but then what happens is something new will come to the surface because you will have less fear than you did before, but maybe you haven't fully removed the fear. So you might be less fearful, but now you might realize, oh, okay, actually, I thought I was fearful of speaking in public, but actually I'm just fearful of speaking in public in front of people that I know, for example. So this is why the healing journey is a journey, because we are discovering different parts of ourselves all the time. And I guess why I really wanted to do this video was really more to highlight the side of spirituality and healing that we don't talk about. Because unfortunately, we live in a world where we have all become obsessed with instant gratification. And as a result of that, we're always doing what feels good in the present moment. Unfortunately, we have forgotten, because of our short attention spans, we have forgotten that the best things come through a period of time. In today's world, within the spiritual community, when people are becoming Reiki masters after having only done a 3-day course, that doesn't sit right for me. And the thing is now today, everyone is calling themselves a healer, or everyone is calling themselves a this and a that. And really the spiritual community are also just in it for the money. And I guess what I also want to highlight is that the New Age movement is not an organic spiritual awakening movement. This is an engineered movement that started in the 1800s, where only a small number of people were putting out information, but again, the information was being put out in a distorted way. And if we look back through history, we can see how the same information has been shared over and over again, but always in a distorted way. And that's why, unless we are at a certain level of discernment, we will never be able to really distinguish what is truth from half-truths. And that's the thing, is that when we're engaging with this kind of work and we only have half the information, it makes it very dangerous, because this is why we sometimes have to hire professionals, because someone who has been professionally trained in any field will be able to ask the right questions. They'll already know about some of the limitations that they might come up against, or the challenges that they might face. So let's say I'm somebody who's never built a house and I decide, okay, I'm going to go and build a house, and I'm just going to go and get a contractor to build this house. But I'm not asking the right questions because I've never built a house before. So the contractor might be saying blah, 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 and I might really trust this contractor. But if I'm not asking the right questions, then maybe once my house is fully built is when I'll start to realize, oh, whoops, I should have done this, this, and this, and this, and this. So this is why they say cheap is expensive, because when we try and cut corners, what happens is that we are omitting a lot of what it takes to become a master. And so today, when everyone is going around and they're calling themselves a master, a Reiki master, or a master teacher, or a master healer, when people used to call themselves that way back, these were people who had trained for who knows how many years, but it was a lot more than just a weekend Reiki class. And so again, if a lot more people are now starting to be interested in spiritual practices, and the thing is, there is a lot of information out there, but again, not all the information is being shared. Like, for example, when a lot of people started practicing astral projection, what they wouldn't have been taught in their 3-day class or by just watching a video on the internet is that when you are traveling in the astral space, the rules are different than in the material world. And so this is why I've heard so many videos of people who were in the New Age movement who then ended up going back to the church because they were having really negative experiences. I've heard so many videos on social media, on YouTube, where people are talking about how they had encounters with demonic entities and that they would experience sleep paralysis, because what's happening is that nowadays all this information is being shared. And so people are actively going and engaging in these spiritual practices. But one thing that they're not being taught is how to protect themselves. And one thing that they're not being taught is the dangers of certain entities, beings, energies, whatever you want to call it, that are present in the astral realms. And so when you decide to go and travel astrally and you're not protecting yourself and you don't know how to move through those spaces, then it is very easy for people to get attacked spiritually. And because they don't understand what's happening to them, they then don't know how to deal with it. And so this is why spirituality, again, there are layers to spirituality. There is an entry level, there is a mid level, there is a high level, and there is a mastery level. And everyone wants to be at the mastery level because nowadays spirituality has become a trend. It's become a lifestyle. And nowadays people seem to think that, oh, if I practice yoga and if I do tarot cards, then I'm spiritual. And people seem to think that if you're ticking things off of a list, then that makes you spiritual. But spirituality isn't something that you do. Spirituality is who you are. Because true spirituality is about knowing your true self. Unfortunately, we live in a world where most people are wearing masks. Most people are not operating as their most authentic self. Most people are pretending to be someone that they're not. They're putting on a persona, and some people have one persona, or some people move through different personas. And I'm not saying this in any judgment, because this is also something that I would do. And these personas, or these masks that we wear, are to hide our shadow self, to hide the parts of us that have been wounded. So let's say if somebody was, let's say, beaten as a child, then perhaps you will have developed a belief that it is not safe for me to express myself because expression equals being beaten. And so as a result of developing that belief, what happens? We then start to move through the world based on a distorted belief. And what's interesting is that the universe will always mirror back to us whatever it is that we believe. So if I move around the world thinking I'm ugly, then I'm constantly looking in the world for confirmations that I am ugly. So if we are constantly thinking the world is not a safe place, then we are only going to be able to see where the world is unsafe. We won't be able to see where the world is safe because we hold the belief. And so the beliefs that we hold essentially create glasses. So we see the world through the lenses of our beliefs. So if we believe the world is not safe, then we are going to move through the world as if it is unsafe, and we're not going to see when safety is present. So for example, when someone is reaching out a helping hand and literally really wants to help you from the kindness of their heart, maybe you'll say, no, every single person in the world before has let me down and is untrustworthy. Therefore, we miss out on opportunities because we're not willing to allow people to help us. And that is what the shadow aspect is to notice, because it is so easy to blame other people for the things that are going wrong in our lives. It is so easy to say, oh, but this person did this and this person did that. But the thing is that when we are operating from a place of shadow, unless somebody tells us you are acting from a place of shadow or you are doing X, Y, and Z, we are unaware. Or unless we actively go and seek, where am I acting out of shadow? We don't notice these things about ourselves. And that's why relationships, any relationships, not just romantic relationships, friendships, family relationships, working relationships, business relationships, so on and so forth, can be difficult depending on if we hold certain shadow aspects. So I'm going to explain a little bit more about what happened to me, because maybe this will give you some context. So when I was a child, when I was very young, under the age of 7, I was sexually abused by my father. And because this was something that was way too much for me to deal with, what happened is I completely dissociated from that, and I created this whole fake persona about who my father was so that I could continue, because he was unsafe, but because I knew I couldn't get away from him, I had to create this fake persona as to who he was so that I could continue living in harmony with him. Now, when he passed away a few years ago, I was so heartbroken. But in my grief of losing him, this is when, in fact, this was my liberation, as I started to realize that I had created this false persona about him. And I started to realize that I needed to turn my life around. I started to really pay attention to where I was in my life and realize that something needed to change. And so I always knew that I had something very dark in my childhood because I couldn't remember anything before the age of 7 years old. I had absolutely no recollection about anything. And so I've spent years really trying to heal that wound, coming to terms with what happened. And it's been a gradual process, because when we go through the healing journey, and this is a journey that I really went on with myself, because anybody who tells you that they can heal you is absolutely lying. Only you have the capacity to heal yourself. Only you have the ability to identify what is a challenge, or what is a shadow aspect, or how that shadow aspect was created. And so gradually what happens is, once you make the decision that you want to heal, the universe will truly guide you, because I really was guided. And I don't want to make this video too much about my own journey, but really about why it's so important to become aware of the shadow aspects that we hold. Because anyways, so I was guided on this journey, and gradually memories started coming back. And it was interesting because this was a lot of the memories were not really coming up in my mind. They were more so body memories. And I've already done a video about how trauma really stays trapped within the body. And so my journey has really been a lot about moving through the body, because the mind can easily forget things. But once we start tapping into the parts of our body that we have dissociated from, the memories that are connected come up, and we can deal with them. And a lot of the emotions come up, because you see, what we tend to do is, when we experience trauma and difficult, challenging situations, a lot of us, we suppress the emotions. We don't want to deal with them. And it's not that we don't want to deal with them, but we don't know how. Because if we haven't been taught something, then we don't really know how to do it. And we're living in a world where no one is really being taught. Well, now I think children are starting to be taught more about dealing with their emotions. But I think it's safe to say that when we were children, and the further back we go, the less we knew about the impact of suppressed emotions on our physical health, on our mental health, our emotional health. And so today, when we look at so many people who are sick in the world, a lot of it is actually connected to unprocessed emotions. Because really, the more we suppress an emotion, because emotions are energy in motion, the more we suppress an emotion, the more that energy builds and builds and builds, and eventually it turns into something physical. And this is where we get things like cysts and tumors and lumps, because they are negatively charged energy that are building and building and building and building and building. And eventually that thing becomes hard, it becomes physical, whereas before it was just energetic. And so our suppressed emotions and our shadow aspects are interconnected, because the reason we develop shadow aspects is because we don't have the ability or the strength, or we're not ready to go and deal with those emotions that we experienced at the time that we experienced that trauma. And as a result of that, because we don't want to feel it, we don't want to look at it, we prefer to pretend that it's not there. And it's a safety mechanism that we do that. And because we want to pretend that it's not there, what happens is we develop blinders. We develop beliefs that limit the way we see the world. And so in my case, because I had been suppressing what I didn't realize, so a friend of mine was visiting, and I was getting really triggered. And so I was just like, I need to have a conversation with you. I don't know what's going on with me, but I'm getting really triggered. And it was something about her not asking for something that she wanted to use. And so she asked me, like, what is it about me not asking that bothers you so much? And I was like, honestly, I don't really know, but it just makes me feel very uncomfortable. And suddenly I was taken back to my child self, where every time I would express something to my father, I would get beaten, or I get punished, or I get locked away, or get sent to bed without food, or whatever it might be. And so when we started talking, she was like, oh, actually, what you really need is consent. And when she said that to me, I totally broke down. And what I realized is why consent is so important to me is because I never gave my consent to be touched as a child. I never gave my consent for my innocence to be taken away from me. And so, whilst I was getting triggered because my friend was not asking if she could borrow something and just borrowing it, it had nothing to do with her borrowing whatever she needed to use. It had to do with the fact that it was time for me to let go of this pattern. And what I realized as a result of this pattern was, because I didn't like confrontation, because for me, in my body memory, confrontation, any kind of expressing my needs or expressing how I was feeling, equated beating or equated punishment. And so what I would have a tendency of doing was that I would, whenever I felt that my boundaries were being crossed, I would just explain it away and be like, you know what? Because I don't want to have any kind of confrontation, I don't even want to have a conversation about something that's bothering me, I'm just going to keep pushing it under the carpet. And eventually, because I kept on pushing it under the carpet, when she borrowed that thing without asking, I got really upset. And that was because a pattern that I hold is not expressing, and then I get really annoyed because I feel like I'm being taken advantage of, and then I explode. Shadow aspect. The shadow aspect was that I have avoidance patterns, because for me, confrontation, or even just a confrontation, equated punishment. And so as a result of that, I have been avoiding so many things in my life. And I was thinking that, okay, I'm helping myself because I'm not expressing my needs and it's not a big deal. But what I didn't realize was, as a result of that, I was not being authentic. So that when I did come to have a conversation with the person once, I was totally triggered and totally upset, and turned it into more of a deal than it needed to be, because my nervous system was so activated that now I screamed at this person instead of just having a conversation. But thankfully, my friend is wonderful and very emotionally aware, that we were able to have a back and forth, and she was able to be like, you're projecting your shit onto me. So even for those of us who are conscious, even for those of us who are into our spiritual practices, we all have shadow aspects. And the sooner we, as a spiritual community, begin to understand that, and until all people who are on this spiritual path start to realize that we all have flaws, we all have problems, we all wear masks, and that's not a bad thing. Because why a lot of these things are coming up to the surface is because it's time for us to deal with them. It's time for us to take action. It's time for us to elevate and to not be making the same mistakes or repeating the same patterns over and over again. Because when we do that, we continue to minimize ourselves. We continue to minimize the parts of ourselves that were wounded. We continue to not validate the experiences that we had. And when we walk through the world looking for validation from other people, what we're truly seeking is validation from ourselves. Validation from ourselves towards the part of us that was wounded, that was hurt. And so there is a lot of gaslighting in the spiritual community, where, because people seem to have the right lingo, it's very easy for them to try and bypass and to not feel the emotions. And the thing is, feeling emotions and dealing with those suppressed emotions, looking at those shadow aspects of ourselves, is uncomfortable. I spent all of yesterday basically crying and feeling like my heart was breaking. But it was not my heart that was breaking. It was all that suppressed emotions that I had from my childhood self, who never felt safe enough back then to deal with everything that she had experienced. It was her heart that was breaking. An adult me was able to just sit there and hold her and tell her, you're okay. It's shit what happened to you, but you're through it. And now that you've allowed yourself to express the grief that you were feeling, express the rage that you were feeling, you can now move on. You can now see how you were not always engaging with people authentically because you were still engaging with people from a place of trauma, from a place of hurt, from a place of believing that everyone else's needs matter more than my own. And so the thing is, trauma doesn't make sense. This is why I'm sure many of you, if you look at your own lives, you can look back to moments where perhaps you over exaggerated or you overreacted in a situation. And when you look back and really try to think about what caused the overreaction, that thing that caused the overreaction, the trigger was not really the issue. It was masking something underlying. And so this is why when we do healing work, when we work on ourselves, when we work on others, if you are a practitioner, it is so important to first deal with our own shit. Because if we are not taking the time to deal with our own issues, with our own shadows, with our own traumas and hurts, then we are still engaging with the world through that lens. And so we are not being authentic. And when we are still operating from a place of hurt, then we can unconsciously hurt other people because we project our fears onto them, our issues onto them, thinking they are the issue when really it's ourselves. And so the sooner we can stop projecting onto other people and stop blaming other people and really just take responsibility for ourselves, not try and blame other people for our problems, not try and push it onto someone else. And really it stems from not wanting to feel. The reason that so many people have developed so many bad habits, these are all a result of coping mechanisms. Drinking, having sex, partying, avoiding, being a workaholic, not spending time in stillness. All of these are coping mechanisms to avoid feeling what is sitting deep inside of us. And the reason why so few people can actually sit in meditation for a long time, it's not because the mind is too busy. It's actually because the body is really uncomfortable. So what I found along my journey is it's easy to dissociate in our mind. Think about how often we can be like, oh, no, I don't want to think about that. I'm just going to pretend it's not happening. The thing is, we can't do that with our bodies. Our bodies cannot hide what is there. The fascia, the nervous system, the lymphatic system, it holds all the memories that we have ever experienced in our lives. And so once we start bringing feeling and awareness back into our bodies, and that's also what meditation does, because when we sit in meditation, we have to feel. When we're constantly busy in our minds, we're not allowing ourselves to feel anything else. And so working with the body is the best way to identify some of these things that we don't even know are there, because the body holds it all. And we try and avoid feeling different parts of our body, and we don't even realize it. What I love to say with my sister is we always say we don't know what we don't know, because until we have awareness of a problem, we don't even know that it exists. And that's why shadow work is really the practice of going into ourselves and identifying the parts of ourselves that we didn't know were there. So like in my situation, I went and I said, I want to remember what happened before the age of 7. And of course, this didn't happen. I made that decision in 2017. I mean, we're now in 2025 and still things are coming up, because you see, the Most High, the universe, wants us to be the best version of ourselves. The universe wants us to be freed of our trauma and our pain. And that's not to say that there isn't going to be difficulty and there isn't going to be pain that we experience as we go through this, because the only way to heal is to feel. And so we're all running around wanting to avoid feeling anything because we are scared of what it's going to bring up. But what it's going to bring up will be uncomfortable in the moment. But once you just allow those emotions to move through you like water, not judging them, not telling yourself a story about them, but simply letting those emotions, that energy move through us, then we come out the other side feeling stronger, feeling reborn in a sense, because we are no longer operating from the same version that we once were, because we are dealing with that trauma. We are minimizing that trauma. Therefore, we are not seeing through the lens of our trauma. We are seeing the world for what it really is. And so, yes, it can be uncomfortable, but the universe wants us to be our whole elevated new selves. And so the universe never gives us more than we can handle. And so this is why things have to be spread out, especially if you are someone who has experienced a lot of trauma, very difficult trauma. Then it can be a process that it will take you through to gradually go through it one step at a time, because once you heal one thing, then you might develop awareness about something else. And it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Once you know, like the image that's coming to my mind is we're doing a jigsaw puzzle and all the pieces are up, but a lot of them are turned over. So we're never going to really be able to put that whole jigsaw puzzle together unless all the pieces are overturned, so that we can put them all back in place where they belong. And that's essentially what the healing journey is slowly, one by one, flipping those individual pieces of the puzzle over, until one day all the pieces of the puzzle will be facing upwards, so that now we can complete our puzzle with ease, because we can see all the pieces, as opposed to trying to run around blindly in the dark and only seeing parts of it. So I guess this video is also to remind you on the journey of healing that you are not broken. None of us are. Yes, we have experienced hardship, and we have discovered maybe really difficult things about our past and our childhood, but you survived those things. And you are stronger than you realize, because you survived those things back now. And so what really we're being called to do when we heal is to just allow ourselves to feel those emotions. And that is one thing that everyone is trying to evade, because no one wants to feel shit. No one wants to feel pain. We've done such a good job at masking it and pushing it to the back of the proverbial closet, so that we never have to be taken back to those instances where we were being abused in whatever form that might be, where our serenity, our freedom, our whatever it was being taken away from us. And so what we're really running away from is the part of ourselves that was wounded, the part of ourselves that needs to be held now by this version of us and be told, you know what, you're fucking awesome regardless of it all. We all have flaws. Nobody is perfect, and we're not here to be perfect. We are all a work in progress, and we are all here to really know who we truly are, to remove the masks and feel comfortable being our most authentic self in the world. Because that is why we all incarnated individually. Yes, as much as we all belong to a collective, we all come here to have our own individual existence, because we all came here to learn our own lessons. We all came here to have our own unique experiences and to share our unique gifts, to share who we are. Because, for example, if we were all, let's say, teachers, we would all teach differently, because we would explain using different explanations, and we would all use explanations based on the experiences that we've had to try and explain a concept or whatever. And so even if we were all to do the exact same job, for example, we would all do it differently. And that is the beauty of the human experience. It is understanding that we are all unique, we are all different, and we can all teach one another. Because in essence, what's happening is, let's say, the image that's coming to mind is when people are in a painting class and they're told, okay, you have to paint this vase, and everyone is sitting in a circle around this vase and everyone is painting it. But the thing is, yes, everyone is looking at the vase, but everyone is looking at it from a different perspective. So what this person sitting over here will see is not the same thing that I would see sitting over here. And that's the beauty of our experience in the world, because we're all looking at the same world, yet we're all looking at it from a different perspective. And that's beautiful, because sometimes we hold missing pieces of the puzzle for somebody else's journey. And so when we share our stories and when we share who we are, our authentic self, then we don't know the influence or the impact that we might have on someone just for sharing our story. And so for those of you who have been on this journey of healing for a while and who, yesterday, I'll be honest, I was angry, I was upset, I was heartbroken, and I was like screaming at God, and I was screaming at my higher self, and I was like, why? Why would we choose this? Why am I here? What the fuck is the point? And the thing is, the point is to come and know ourselves better than we know anything else. But the thing is, we live in a society that prioritizes knowing everything but ourselves. Everything is always about going outwards, outwards, outwards. It's never about going inwards and trusting what we know for ourselves, trusting that inner voice, because the inner voice of our intuition was gifted to us by the Most High to never lead us astray. Everything we need is inherently available within. It is just when there is so much chitter-chatter, and noise from the outside world, it becomes really difficult to hear that inner voice. But that inner voice screams inside each and every one of us. It's just that some of us are listening more than others, and some of us are still overwhelmed by the chaos of the world. And so this is why stillness, this is why shadow work, this is why just sitting with ourselves are practices that might seem simple on the outside, but when you really practice them and allow yourself to go deep, you'll be surprised by what you find. So for those of you who've made it this far in this video, if you are somebody who needs support on your journey, because as much as we heal ourselves, sometimes we need someone to be a mirror. Sometimes we need someone to help us ask those questions that we're not asking ourselves. So if that is something that you need and you would like further support on your journey, then you can get in touch with us in the description box below. We are here to be guides, be a support, to be your sisters as you move through your own journey of healing and really starting to discover who you truly are.